three subjects to talk about today, so I hope it doesn't. If anyone gets bored, just tell me to speed up or something. You get heckled from behind. That's the problem. So a little summary on COVID. It's only very quick because there isn't an awful lot to say about COVID now. Places like the BBC are no longer publishing information the information that we used to use, so I can't refer to that. There's still this COVID dashboard, but they're not really updating this as often as they could. So this one is only current up to May, and we're halfway through June, more or less, nearly a third of the way through June. So suffice it to say, this is the number of patients admitted to hospital. You've seen this lots of times before, from the start of the pandemic all the way through 2021, 2022, 2023. We have had a little wave since the new year, which may or may not be due to it probably is due to a particular subspecies of Omicron, which has been sweeping the world at this stage. But as you can see, it's peaked, follows the general trend of less and less people being admitted to hospitals, and is now on its way down quite significantly. And this is sort of the last week in May, I think. So we're 2 weeks further on from this, really. So that it has carried on down, but we just can't see it at the moment. Slightly more up to date is this COVID reporting system that works from apps on people's phones, and it's up to people. Millions of people around the country have been recording whether they have a COVID infection or not for the last 3 years. And it has actually been remarkably good at predicting or telling us more about in real time about how many infections there are around the country. So it works in a different way, but we know over the 3 years it reflects government collected data, so it's reasonably accurate. It is getting slightly more troublesome. As you can see, these lines are looking a bit less smooth because less and less people are doing this now, because we're more or less starting to forget about COVID. But this is current up to 5th of June, that last little dot there. And you can see we are dropping quite steeply, more steeply than probably the steepest since early this year, in late last year. And that's carrying on down. It's dropping really quite fast now. And that level is crossed the line to being below the level below any level that we've seen since certainly late 2021, but I would say mid 2021 is probably the last time we saw anything this low. So we've reached a sort of a 2-year low, and it's still going down. So hopefully it'll carry on doing that. It's sort of difficult to predict. These variants continue to circulate, and of course, there's still going to be a need for vaccination for people who are at risk, but the risk of getting COVID and the risk of hospital admission is getting less and less as the time goes by. So vaccines, we know there's a spring booster program that's been running. That finishes at the end of this month, June the 30th, and it's for adults aged 75 years and over. Care homes, people who are immunosuppressed, as defined in this green book, which is the standard text for doctors to look at, began on the 3rd of April, will end on the 30th of June, and there'll be no more vaccinations until we move into an autumn booster campaign. We don't know a huge amount about the autumn booster campaign yet, but I would imagine it will probably have a wider age range, like the over 50s, because they won't have had a booster for about 12 months at that point. So that they'll need a little help, a little boost. But the last time we got any information from government level or the what's it called, the JVCI, the viral advisory board, was at the beginning of the year. So we're not very clear about what will actually happen, but we certainly seem to think that there will be an autumn booster campaign coming. New variants. This is the variant I've been talking about called Arcturus. I don't know why they've started giving them daft names, but they are. There's one actually coming on which is later than this. This one seems to be the one we've just looked at. See, it was rising in the UK in the first half of April, so that's, oops, that's probably this one. This one probably calls that, but we now know that that's peaked and gone down again. So again, we're not getting a lot of data published on this, so I can't be absolutely sure, but it looks like this wave has passed. I know there is another wave which is something like 2.75, but we're seeing no sign of that appearing, and we may not see it at all. So there are probably, in fact, the latest notable symptom was the itchy eyes and conjunctivitis, which people have referred to a lot. I think we've had 3 people with aspergillosis say they have got a COVID infection in the last month or two, who found it to be relatively severe. I don't think anyone's ended up in hospital, but it is seems to be, people are interpreting it as relatively severe, so maybe a little bit like having the flu, but people generally aren't ending up in hospital. So in admittance terms, it's not particularly severe infection, not particularly severe symptoms, so we don't worry about that too much. There are probably more waves to come, but as you can see, the impact on our health, on our admittance rate to hospital is still dropping gradually. So it all looks pretty much it's under control. Oops, didn't change May to June. The summary June 2023 is pretty much the same as it was back then. Risk of hospitalization is very low. Take plenty of exercise, but protect yourselves with masks, social distancing, hand washing, and so on, like we all have been doing for years now. And watch for signs of any new variants coming through. But the ones we're seeing coming through are all, none of them have been anything to worry about. They're better at spreading than they are at causing symptoms, which is the natural course of a virus anyway. So it's highly unlikely we're going to get back to the situation of 2 years ago. We are looking at the end of this pandemic in terms of it being a danger to hospitals functioning, and also we have our vaccines available, which we'll be taking advantage of towards the end of this year. We might be getting different types of vaccines. So a vaccine that may be more targeted at Omicron, so it'll be more protective perhaps. And we'll have to wait and see when we get more information. So hazard level, get vaccinated and carry on living with it, essentially. That's that. Any questions about viruses or COVID? Want to have a quick drink? No. Okay, so on to the next topic. And that topic is indoor air pollution. This is something we all think a lot about, and we were just talking about allergy, and certainly indoor air pollution does have an impact on allergies, because what occurs indoor, if you have an allergy, becomes sensitive to something indoors, of course it reaches a higher concentration indoors than it would outside usually. So you would start to notice the effect of it on your health and on your symptoms. So we're interested in that indoor air pollution. This whole talk is based on an article which was published in the New Scientist journal in April, I think it was, and that's the URL to go and have a look at it. I know it's a subscription-based journal, so you may not be able to read this article unless you actually pay for that month's edition. But I'm covering all the main points, so maybe if you get enough out of what I'm saying, you won't need to go and purchase that. It's come from it's a sort of a summary, which I thought was nice. about all the things that we need to be concerned about with indoor air pollution, rather than just the damp and the mold. Comes from a series of centres in France, in America, and in the UK. So we know, and I've covered many times, damp and molds in a home can cause and exacerbate various diseases and allergies. For example, the ones that we know are strongly linked enough to be referred to as potentially causative asthma. We certainly think damp and molds in a home can cause asthma in children and sometimes in adults. If you've already got asthma, it can make your asthma worse. There's also sinusitis, which is, I think, a bit underestimated. There's a lot of people have sinusitis and really don't have it diagnosed. So a headache in the morning after sleeping all night, probably with your mouth open, maybe an inflamed sinus, and that may be caused by allergies, it may be caused by dust, it may be caused by the cold temperature of the air that you've been inhaling if you sleep by a window, for example, which tends to happen to me occasionally. So sinusitis is something that probably needs more attention, and there's certainly a fungal variant of sinusitis which people with ABPA tend to get, which we don't talk about too much, although our clinics here certainly do see cases of fungal sinusitis. Hypersensitivity, so this is a sort of a specific type of allergy, very tightly defined around a particular allergen, but you may not know what that allergen is, so you can sort of have this reaction to a house and not be able to work out what the reaction is to. And in those cases, quite often the only way to relieve it, which is to remove the exposure, is to actually move house. And that happens in some cases. It's quite nasty. You couldn't possibly carry on living in a house if you suffer from hypersensitivity pneumonitis. So it's quite severe. It's relatively rare. I think this is one of the ones where we see a lot of cases of this type of thing associated with occupation as well as a house, a home. Eczema as well, even though it's a skin reaction, we know can be pretty sure that damp and mold can cause eczema in a home. This is obviously caused by allergy, but a damp home is a complex environment. So we know a lot about, we talked a lot about allergy. I'm not sure we know a lot about allergy, but we talked about it. And one thing that occurred to me that I should talk about in this meeting in the future is to try and work out what actually we know about why allergy happens, which I may do in the future, but not this month. It's a complex environment in the home. There's a lot more to be aware of than damp and molds. And if you have breathing difficulties and you're trying to relieve those symptoms, then you should probably be aware of these other factors that are harmful within a home. So I will run through those as quickly as I can. Indoor air pollution was first seriously tackled in 1986 by the World Health Organization, WHO. And they tried to define what was causing this. This was the era of calling homes sick buildings, which we don't do much of now, but back then it was called sick building syndrome. And they tried to define it so we could work out more about why it was happening and what we could do about it. And there were 6 main causes named back then. Tobacco smoke was a big one and still remains a big one, even though a lot of people have given up smoking since 1986. But it's up there still as probably the most significant indoor air pollution that you need to be aware of and to avoid if you are having respiratory problems. Carbon monoxide received a lot of attention back then, and we all know you can get carbon monoxide sensors to use in places where you suspect carbon monoxide may arise, such as around cookers and burners and anything burning something. If it's not burning it properly, you can get an increase in the level of carbon monoxide from faulty or poorly ventilated gas appliances. Radon gas is only really relevant for people living in places like Cornwall, where there is radioactive granite on which they all live. The radioactivity can break down from the natural decay of uranium, thorium, and radium can generate radon gas, which is radioactive. And if you're constantly exposed to that, because it can seep into your house from underground, that's a hazard. Getting more up to date, I suppose, they actually named the first of many volatile organic compounds is just compounds that will end up in the air for you to breathe in. They're volatile, and they tend to be organic, of sort of generated from living things, if you like. Trichloroethylene and benzene were the two named back then. And finally, the other hazard are particles with diameters of less than 2.5 micrometers. This size is important because that's about the size of particle that needs to penetrate into the alveoli of your lungs, the very deepest layers of the lungs. So once a particle gets to that level, it can you can start to inhale them. They can get very deep down and start causing problems with your respiratory health. Tiny airborne agglomerations of inorganic chemicals, soot, back in the day when we used to have indoor fires, I guess. Metals, soil and dust, so there's your gardening, and dust in a home can contain also is essentially something that contains human hair or pet hair, skin cells, on which will absorb moisture quite quickly and will incubate molds as well. So that's something we've talked about before. That was 1986. Many more VOCs have been added since then. Also, well, many more VOCs there's dozens and dozens of these chemicals. I'll talk about that a little bit more in a minute. Detecting them is difficult. But ultra-fine particles, so even smaller particles, less than 0.1 micron. So the previous particles were 2.5 microns. Well, we know there was work published, I think, in the 1990s, which showed that these tiny particles were small enough to, when we inhaled them, they were small enough to actually not only get into the lower parts of our lungs, but also to enter our bloodstream. And that is linked with heart attack, strokes, and neurological conditions. So it's very much become a very much important part of indoor air pollution research, because we've got these quite nice associations. And of course, we all know about allergic dusts, which I just talked a little bit about. The allergy can be to molds, most obviously, and often we talk about molds because in a damp home you can see the molds growing on the wall in black areas of sort of creeping black stains that you can wipe off. But actually in the home, bacteria cause a lot of the allergen production in dusts, as well as pet hair and that type of thing. So it's certainly not just molds. We shouldn't be, if you're having breathing problems, you shouldn't be just worrying about molds. You should be also worrying whether you've got a pet, whether you have anything else that's sort of growing and is shedding something like a plant or anything like that. And that's certainly something to be aware of. So what do we do about this indoor air pollution? First suggestion, and probably a good suggestion, is open a window. In fact, open several windows to promote good airflow through the house, so that a lot of this indoor air pollution is removed from the home as the wind blows through. However, we have to consider outdoor air. Outdoor air can be full of particulates, nitrous oxides, and more VOCs from traffic outside. It can be full of ozone, which can convert indoor pollutants into hazardous chemicals such as formaldehyde. So what this is telling us really is, yes, open your windows, But if you are having respiratory issues and you live close to a busy road, then maybe you should consider just opening your windows at the back of the house away from the road, for example. And on sunny days are great, such as today in Manchester. I don't know whether it's the same everywhere else. On sunny days, some of these chemicals can be turned into ozone by the sun, and that's when outside air becomes more difficult to breathe. So on a sunny day, maybe we shouldn't. We should tend to keep our windows shut if we're having problems, to see if that makes a difference. However, little is known about these VOCs. We know there's lots of them, but we don't know which ones are we don't know all the information about which ones are the most toxic ones, the one we need to be most wary of, and we can't detect a lot of them. So we know they're there, we can't detect them, we don't know how harmful they are. There's a few that we do. So trichloroethylene is the smelly stuff you find in glues and varnishes and cleaning fluids. It's a known carcinogen that has been linked to brain, liver and kidney damage if exposed for a long time or at particularly high levels. So generally this sort of thing, if you're working with glues and paints and varnishes, they'll tell you to open all the windows before you start work and make sure the area is well ventilated. And that's good advice, especially if you've got respiratory issues. Something I'd not heard of before, acrolein, is a molecule produced by your gas stove and by wood burners, deep fat fryers, not air fryers, deep fat fryers, and by regular and electronic cigarettes. So I'm putting a lot of buttons there. I was almost expected Chris to sigh at that point, as the electronic cigarettes are a favourite subject. It's coming from all of these things, and we know sustained exposure. So if you're inhaling an electronic cigarette, can cause respiratory and cardiovascular disease.
Yeah.
Yep. Good.
Yeah, that's the next study.
So that's also something to be aware of. Gas stoves, wood burners, not necessarily a good thing. I think as we move over the next decade, we're going to be moving away from gas anyway, so that should help. Lots of people seem to be putting these wood burners in their homes, and that's not great if you've got respiratory problems overall.
For the wood burners, a lot of people are very popular, as you know.
Yeah.
But I wonder if anybody ever, the people selling them ever, no warnings at all.
Well, they all they have to do is sell to within defined safety limits. So you have to have particular types of chimneys. They don't need to tell you all about this stuff.
So I suppose it's down to the buyer to investigate.
Which is a bit bad, really.
Yeah, it is. I think that's poor. They should at least put.
Should we put a website together?
Yeah, or something to say, however, if you suffer from, because
woodburnerstovers.rubbish.com.
Well, yeah, that kind of thing. Yeah.
I'm all for that. That'll be our commercial project. I'm going to charge for access.
Yeah.
Also, next thing, heated oil. So we've had a sort of deep fat fryers up here, but this seemed to fall into a category where they wanted to reiterate this. Emissions from heated oil when cooked in an unventilated kitchen has been linked to an increase in lung cancer. So we know a little bit. We don't know what exactly is causing that. I think that's what that's trying to tell us. But we know there's been epidemiological work that's shown that people who tend to use heated oil have a higher risk of lung cancer. I guess that's how it goes. And so it's really surprising, some of this stuff that we need to be aware of and maybe cut down exposure to. What else do we know? Oh, there's more. Another one, exposure to benzene indoors. So cigarette smoke, surprise, surprise. Or the infiltration of vehicle exhaust fumes. So if you back your vehicle into your living room on a regular basis, that's not a good idea.
Probably not a good idea anyway.
Yeah. This increases the risk of leukemia, asthma, and low birth weight. The higher the concentration, the higher the risk. So there has been dose responsive work done on that to show us these things are something you should minimize, both the amount you come into contact with at any one time and the length of time for which you come into contact with them. But there are lots of holes in this information. What about low or occasional exposure to these known toxic substances? We hear an awful lot of this over the last 10 to 15 years about molds and mycotoxins, but all these other things are also things that we know little about, and maybe a low exposure to one of them is a bad thing, or maybe it's quite easy to have more than one of these in your home at the same time. So who knows how they might interact with each other? We just don't know. We don't know much about other pollutants and their impact on our health. So we do strongly suspect indoor air pollution is linked to rise in asthma cases, unexplained migraine headaches, and even some reproductive problems, but we cannot yet be sure. So what that's telling us is someone has done epidemiological work and found in homes that have indoor air issues that the people that live in that tend to get asthma or unexplained migraines. They don't know why, they just know we can link the two things in a study. One of the main issues with this environment is every single home and every single building tends to be different. There isn't one measurement. There isn't one measurement that describes all homes. If you can remember, outdoor air pollution is much easier. You put a sensor by the side of the road, and that pretty much gives us a good idea of all the outdoor environment in that area. With homes, every single home, the one next door will be different to your home. So normal science, where we would look at 1,000 homes and try and draw conclusions, is nearly impossible, although people have tried to do that. So it's very difficult work to do. And the outdoor air pollution inevitably seeps into the indoor environment. So outdoor air pollution varies right across the country. So this adds in another level of variation. Is it to do with the indoor situation? Is it something happening in that house, or is it just coming from the outdoor air? So we know a few things. We know that they're harmful, but we don't know why, and we don't know how for the most part. What do we do about it? Well, we can control the sources of these pollutants. I know with damp and mold, we can control the damp. If we control the damp, we can control the mold and eliminate that as a problem. Knowing what we know now, we have to look at cooking as well, because those gas burners we now know are pretty polluting. We can stop using gas burners, and like I say, we might be doing that in the nearish future anyway. But the other way to do it is ventilate your kitchen properly. Have a fan in your kitchen that is on while you're cooking and for a reasonable time after you've been cooking. I have a fan at home which is on all the time at low levels, and it reacts if things get a bit more humid. Its speed increases. The problem with them is they do make some sound. None of them are silent, so people tend to turn them off, but really they need to be on a lot of the time to cut down on the potential for you to inhale these nasty gases that come from cooking. And frying is more polluting than boiling or steaming, so maybe apart from frying in oil not being great for our cardiovascular health, maybe if you've got respiratory issue, try to boil and steam food rather than fry it. Water vapor is generally not thought to be toxic in itself, although it can cause damp in a home. We can even give names to this toxin. These toxins: frying releases aldehydes and polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons, PAHs. Meat can be an especially rich source of particulates, and we know particulates are bad, so try not to fry meat too much. It's a case of moderating what we do rather than completely eliminating. Like I say, in my case, my response to this information is to install an always-on fan in my kitchen, which seems to work quite well. Although it causes some noise, you have to get used to the sound of it being on. That's the thing. So cooking, turn the kitchen extractor fan on, or fit one that's always on, which is actually the minimum standard for new buildings. I think you have to have these fans that are rated in a particular way, which means they're on most of the time. Outside the kitchen, and this is where people will start to think, oh my goodness, I can't possibly comply with this. My wife being one of those people. It might be a good idea to leave the wood burners and open fires unlit. So let's get rid of the wood burners. Let's not have open fires. Well, not many places have open fires anymore. But also anything that's smelly. My older brother will support this completely because he can't stand things that smell. No, I'm not going to go further than that. Avoid scented candles, avoid air fresheners, avoid superfluous smellies. And something that's not mentioned here, which I'm constantly saying. Oh, candles. What was that?
Diffuse.
Anything that's putting chemicals and scents into your atmosphere, not good. You're all right. You don't suffer from a respiratory problem, but anyone with a respiratory problem
Be lost without a diffuser.
needs to pay attention to this kind of thing. People think that, this is a direct quote from the paper, people think that air fresheners, incense, I love a bit of incense, and essential oils are good for indoor air quality, that they will clean the air and degrade pollutants, but no, they are actually pollution themselves.
I never thought that they would clean it.
No, I didn't.
Yeah.
It's just
But
but
they
like the smell. I like the smell and I like
Hold that
watching a diffuser. The other thing about plug-in air fresheners, I don't know if anyone's aware of this, but they can clog up your plug sockets, so I will use them for that reason.
Between plug in.
Yeah, I think they're a fire hazard, to be honest.
We've referred that to our fire expert.
Yeah, exactly.
Never been to one that's, if not
One
someone
of
that's
our
on
plug
our
sockets
radars. but
actually got all kind of gunged up and it messed all the plug socket up. Yeah.
Hmm?
And so I don't trust them because I was thinking if the oil overheated and I don't know, could be wrong,
Yeah,
Lauren,
yeah.
I'll leave you to
No,
investigate
no,
that, but that's why I prefer the diffuser now, because I just put the drops of oil in that
Yeah.
and then it's just the water, isn't it? And the oil kind of diffusing out. So I'd rather, and I have one of those little battery operated spray ones in the home rather than a plug-in one.
However, in my home,
Jackie has.
I have to contend with these things, you plug it, it's like a bottle of,
Yeah, that's right.
you
but
plug
they're
them
the
in,
ones- No.
and you walk past them and they spray stuff out in your face.
That's-
What
yeah.
an absolute nightmare those
Yeah,
things are.
But they're the ones I'm on about. I don't like the plug-in ones, whereas the
Right.
other one is a freestanding one with the battery in it. And
Right.
as you walk past that, it just
Sprays toxic
sprays,
fumes into your face, yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
This is
Well, I have
actually,
it slightly turned. so-
I'm going to give this slide presentation again this evening to my wife
Yeah.
and see how far I get.
Yeah, well, yeah. See on Monday with your shades on.
There's more houseplants. There was a series of newspaper articles up to quite recently which said certain houseplants can clean the air in your home,
It's lilies,
that type of thing. Well, it's a load of rubbish.
is it? Right, okay.
Well, it's not. They can,
Oh,
but you
okay.
probably need to fill your house with these things to make any difference.
Really?
They do
No.
absorb
No.
a few pollutants,
Yeah.
but really
Yeah.
not very much
No.
at all. Good ventilation
Yeah.
works well. Reduce the concentration. So all of these things we can carry on doing. I will probably still have toxic fumes sprayed in my face because the windows are all open, and that's fine.
Yeah,
Generated indoors. It does invite ozone in, but unless you live on a busy road, on balance, fresh air has a positive effect. So there's a clue of
I'll
the.
just have that slide for my other.
Even if you're on a busy road, overall, I guess if you open the windows to the side and the back away from them,
Yeah.
then that's better than not having the windows open at all. Especially if you've got those diffusers plugged in. Especially when the sun isn't shining and ozone production is low. I guess this seems like it's contradicting itself, but I guess if you're having problems with your respiration, then maybe if you're aware that having your windows open on a sunny day might cause this issue, then
So I might say this, but my nan lives on it's really disconcerting when you can't see anyone you're talking to. My nan lives on the East Lancashire Road in Liverpool, and that's a really busy,
Dual carriageway.
6-lane dual carriageway. And she's got 2 big conifers in their front garden. The front garden's quite big as front gardens go, and they're right on the front, on the fence line of where she's got them, and they're pretty tall, quite ugly things, to be honest.
And the brown on one side.
Completely brown on
Yep.
the side of the road, as green as anything on one side.
Yeah.
Dead as everything on the other
Yeah.
side, and that just shows how much they're
Yeah.
absorbing
Yeah,
from that
cool.
traffic
Yeah.
on the road.
Yeah.
Yeah,
However, she's also got a big Acer on the fence line, and
Mm.
that is probably worth at least £3,000.
Yeah, it's thriving.
That's not, it's absolutely thriving.
Mhm.
so ACEs don't mind traffic pollution.
This one doesn't. I mean, mine can't even look at the sun, and they're dead.
Okay, so other technology, air scrubbing technology such as HEPA air filters. Quite a few people have these, and they're great, but they need maintenance and they can be quite expensive to buy and to run. And this is the hint that was new to me. A cheaper fix is to buy a device to measure air quality. Now, we had a little device to carry around with you as you walked around outside. And a few people borrowed that, and that enabled you to actually find where the most pollution is around where you live, and generally to walk somewhere where there's less pollution, because walking is good for you. But now I've realized there are quite a lot of these devices that have been made for use in the home that were mentioned in this article, and I didn't know. So this is quite good. Some of the devices will cost well under £100, and you can site them in different rooms of your house, and use them to measure if you've got a problem. In any,
For them.
well, they quite often they work. You've got your meter, and it works with an app.
Right.
Did I actually have an example of that?
Because I think.
Yeah, there you go.
Blood pressure on your phone these days, and would have thought.
So I simply typed in air quality monitor, and I got a list of 10 here, which was produced on the 6th of April. And a lot of them, this particular one, that's just the one at the top of the article, will measure fine particle pollutants. So those particulates that we know cause damage, not only to respiratory health, but also to cardiovascular health. It can detect molds. It can detect some of these VOCs. I suspect just a few of them, maybe the more obvious ones, and radon gas. And you just cite those things in your house, and it'll work off a smartphone. There were a whole list of 10 of these, and there was one. I think there was one made for an Android phone, which I thought was really good. And I might invest at some point. Was £70. So it's not cheap, but not wildly expensive. And the one made for iPhones was more like £100–110. So there's a broad range of costs and models, and maybe that's a good thing to suggest people who are having issues with their respiratory health in their indoor environment to purchase these things and check their homes over for problems. So that's a new bit of advice, which I thought was very good. To control the sources of pollution, there's some things that are a little bit counterintuitive. Don't overdo the cleaning. Dusting and vacuuming resuspends dust in your home, and you inhale that, and you can cause a problem by inhaling too much of it. Better to use a wet cloth and wipe these surfaces rather than a dry duster or a vacuum cleaner. It doesn't differentiate between HEPA filtered vacuum cleaners and just ordinary vacuum cleaners. So I guess I don't know whether they've done that work, but certainly if you use any sort of a vacuum cleaner, you're liable to disturb dust. Choose cream cleaners and roll-on deodorants instead of sprays. I think everyone who uses deodorant sprays will be aware of the cloud of solvent that you are enveloped in when you use those things. And indeed, that stuff is not particularly good for you if you've got respiratory health problems. It's also a good idea to leave any new furniture and furnishings in a well-ventilated space for a few days before putting them in position, presumably somewhere that you're not going into. to avoid these VOCs. So a lot of the VOCs will gradually be eliminated over time. That's great if you've got a space, I guess. That wouldn't work in my home because I don't have a space to put them in, apart from the back garden. But that's another thing that's well worth thinking about. Don't panic about this. I've named a load of potential hazards, but some level of indoor air pollution is inevitable. We can't avoid it all. We shouldn't jump to the conclusion that we're being poisoned in our own homes. I guess if it's just in this group's case, it's about the respiratory health issues and whether these suggestions will help or not with some of those issues. There are research needs and scientific gaps in our knowledge, but that doesn't necessarily mean everyone is at some great risk. In the future, there may still be much to learn, but just like sick building syndrome, which triggered a flurry of discoveries, of which we've just been talking about one of them, COVID-19, believe it or not, has also put a burner under research into indoor air quality, because we were all paying attention to indoor air quality during the pandemic. This particular person thinks it's a new dawn in indoor air pollution research. And I know there's a big group who've been working in London for years, and they are highly active now in this area. So there is a lot of work being done to try and help with indoor air pollution now. We're gradually starting to understand it better. We'll know more in 10 years than we do now, which you would kind of hope was true. But if you need a rule of thumb, which is the same as we've been saying over and over and over about damp and mold, it's about ventilation, ventilation, ventilation to remove those pollutants from your home. Doesn't matter what they are, if you're removing them, they won't cause you any damage. And that's that one. Any questions on that one? The last one is much shorter, I can tell you that. Okay, we'll push through. This is just a quick thing. A situation that is quite topical, climate change. I don't know if we're all familiar, but the amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere is increasing steadily. From 1960, below 320. Currently, approaching 420. So there is too much carbon dioxide in our atmosphere. It's increasing. A lot of that is about the carbon dioxide we as human beings are putting into that atmosphere. And we need to do something about it. And indeed, we are doing lots about it now. This reinforces the greenhouse effect in our atmosphere. Too much carbon dioxide. Well, that traps the warmth of the sun, and the planet is heating up. Not the plant, the planet. Consequently, we need to cut the levels of CO2 in our atmosphere. How can we do that? As we know, we're reducing the burning of fossil fuels. We're reducing human activities that lead to carbon dioxide release. We can trap CO2 by promoting plant growth, reforestation, and there are technologies that don't yet exist in as good a form as we need, but artificial scrubbers of carbon dioxide are being developed so that if some industry generates a gas that contains a lot of carbon dioxide, the scrubbers will remove that carbon dioxide before releasing that gas into the atmosphere and then store the carbon dioxide. At the moment, a lot of people are saying underground. But did you know fungi have a big role to play in this? I didn't, so I carried on. It's another article from New Scientist. As we talk about aspergillosis a lot, we'll know that lots of fungi grow underground in the soil. And these particular types of fungi, mycorrhizal fungi, live around plants. Now, when I was at university, we had one example of a mycorrhizal fungus which grew around the roots of pine trees. It appears in the 40 years since then, they've now decided that almost every plant that we can see growing and every tree is associated with fungi growing around its roots. And those fungi assist those plants in growing. The mycorrhiza, the fungus, the plant makes organic molecules such as sugars, and that's what happens when you shine sunlight on their leaves by photosynthesis. It then takes those carbohydrates, transfers them downwards towards the roots, and some of them get donated to the fungus growing around the roots. Well, the fungus supplies the plant with water and mineral nutrients, so stuff the plant could normally reach is provided by the fungus. So the fungus gets carbohydrate food, and the plant gets more water and nutrients such as phosphorus that the fungus is very good at extracting from soil. It's a symbiotic relationship. This is all very nice, but how does this help world atmospheric carbon levels? We can illustrate the sort of cycle here. Here's a tree, here's some roots, all the leaves, and sunshine generates carbohydrates which go down to the roots and are taken up by fungus growing around the roots, the mycorrhizal fungi. The red and white spotted mushrooms we see sometimes are an example of the fruiting body of one fungus that is actually living down there as a mycorrhiza. I was going to test, I don't know what this term means. I was going to test our young students who may have been taught this, because I certainly wondered, what is a mixotrophic plant? No, don't know. Like
plants.
all right. Okay.
No.
Don't know. So that's how it seems to work. The woody plants and trees remove carbon dioxide from the atmosphere during photosynthesis. So they're sort of inhaling the carbon dioxide, reducing the amount in the atmosphere, and they have ultimately they transfer that into wood. They make wood out of it. So that is now trapped in that tree or that plant and is no longer in the atmosphere. So that's one way of removing carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. However, the fungi, who are being fed by the plant essentially with carbon, as fungi themselves cannot do this. Obviously, their fungus cannot photosynthesize. It's not a plant. It's then transferred down to the plant's roots, goes underground, passed over to the fungus, and because the fungus is almost completely underground, the carbon stays underground, helping to reduce atmospheric carbon dioxide, which sounds really brilliant. This group of researchers, which is done in South Africa, have estimated that 13.1 gigatons of carbon dioxide is locked up underground after being extracted from the atmosphere every year. Now, gigatons sounds like a big number to me, but what is that in relation to is that a useful amount of carbon dioxide? And yes, it is. So is 13.1 gigatons a lot? This is about 36%, more than a third of the carbon dioxide emitted by all the burning fossil fuels on the planet. So that is a massive contribution to keeping the amount of carbon dioxide in our atmosphere low and to fighting global warming. And clearly that is a system that we really need to pay attention to as we progress to try and reduce the amount of carbon dioxide in our atmosphere. And it's all caused by fungus. So there you go.